Our next speakers, they've requested an innovative interview session. So please welcome to the stage Mr. Patrick Brummer of Brummer and Partners, and his prominent Philippine partner here, Nori Poblador, who is a partner of their fund here. Thank you very much. Called Navigar, along with another individual, a prominent entrepreneurial figure who might be in this room, I think. He's at the back there. Hello. Yeah, so we worked on some questions for our two distinguished people, and I must say it's very nice, a privilege to have Patrick Brummer. As a coincidence, I found another Swedish fellow here who, it turns out, grew up in the same hometown that Patrick's partner grew up with and may know quite well. So that was a nice coincidence then. But okay, so we'll talk about the situation in Philippines, because it's you know, it's a long way from Stockholm, and so maybe if I could ask, how did an asset manager in Stockholm identify Philippines as a potentially interesting place to invest?
Well, we happen to be based in Stockholm, and we're happy to see everybody in Stockholm. It's a very nice city, not as nice as Manila, but very nice. Now, we are a global asset management firm, so we are run out of Stockholm, New York, London, Singapore. And we manage a lot of money for a lot of people all over the world. But we also have a private equity arm. And I was very lucky to, 3 years ago, meet with two very skilled individuals here in Manila. My partner here, Nori, and Javier Infante, who I think is somewhere in the back. So we decided to set up a private equity fund. And we raised, for the first fund, $120 million. And we are now in the process of putting that money to work. And obviously, what we heard here before is really optimistic, I must say. I tend to always be a little bit more on the pessimistic side. So for me, you know, if you have predictable growth with less volatility, and I'm very interested in volatility, I would say if you reach the 8–9% growth numbers, which would be wonderful. If you would ask me what would be the risk, then maybe that would be overheating and some bubbles in part of the economy. And I'd rather have, actually, which might be the wrong thing to say in this community, 1 percentage points lower growth without bubbles. But I love sort of predictable growth. But it's all about execution. So my partners here on the ground, and compared to other private equity organizations who fly in and out of Manila, we have a team on the ground here, which means we see things for the long term. So our clients have invested their money with us and are willing to stay in for 10 years.
Bravo. And maybe if I could ask Mr. Brummer to talk a bit more about your global organization. How it founded?
Okay, I mean, we obviously manage money in all financial markets, long, short equity, fixed income, currencies. It's altogether 350 people. And again, New York, London, Singapore. So, I mean, we try to keep track of spotting the dangers and the opportunities in the financial markets. And obviously, there are some areas of concern. And again, that's why I think that a place like the Philippines is a place where you can make a long-term commitment, whereas in some other areas of the world, it might be more difficult to make sort of 10-year decisions because you don't have predictable growth to the same extent. And that obviously goes for the Western world in particular. So we manage $20 billion for diversified client base.
Okay, very good, very interesting and exciting. Now, I notice on your information and in your website that you have offices in Stockholm, London, New York, Singapore, Dhaka, and Manila. Others might say, you know, but what pulled you to Manila as opposed to, you know, Indonesia is an exciting place, Vietnam, India. what was it Nori and Javi, or what?
I mean, I very much like the sort of country characteristics from a top-down perspective. And I asked around, and then some friends from Goldman Sachs brought me here 3 years ago and introduced me to Nori and Javier. And I very much liked what I saw, so we decided to start this operation together.
I see. So it was a people organization. And if I can just, for people's background, Nori and Javi, a very interesting combination. I'll just explain for a sec, because Nori is, considered, for Patrick's basis, but here he's considered certainly one of the nation's premier finance professionals. And Javi Infante done a very successful number of different major organizations. Ambergris, that became TELUS here, a 10,000 person employer, and run later on. So quite an impressive story. So a good combination. So did they meet each other before and already have something worked out together, or how did it all? Is there a story that they came together? Yeah, Nori maybe can talk about that.
Yeah, Javi and I went to school together, both high school and college, and at some point in time we're in Singapore at the same time. We had coincidentally moved into the same apartment block. And this was back in 2000, I believe. And from then on, we'd been talking about putting up a private equity business. I mean, at some stage, he came back and started Ambergris. I was always in the private equity industry, and we had spoken maybe 2 or 3 times about businesses in Manila needing funding, and not having providers of capital in the Philippines. So it wasn't until it was always an idea we exchanged thoughts on, and we thought to do this we really needed a fund size that was substantial enough to make a difference and to allow us to hire the best team. And it wasn't until we met Patrick that all things came together.
Very interesting. Okay, so that's a good story. Well, maybe if I could ask some macroeconomic questions of you both. What do you think are some of the main opportunities? Or okay, so let's talk about the risks first. What are the risks to the global economy that might impact the Philippine situation? What do you think? Whoever or both, hopefully.
Well, I'm not a trained economist, but obviously we manage a lot of risk in a lot of markets, yes. So we have to have a view on things, right? And unfortunately then, Europe, where I come from, has lots and lots of challenges ahead of them. I mean, if you look at the euro area, which is very much in focus, that is sort of 8% of world GDP, 25% of world taxes, but unfortunately 50% of world cost for a welfare state. Oh. So that just tells you that there are some challenges in some part of the world. And hopefully, and we also know that debt levels are still quite high in many parts of the world, and how this deleveraging process will be managed without big disruptions is to me an open question. I mean, there are many different scenarios, but I think you have to have your ears on the ground, and there are some potential accidents that could happen. I mean, we are just now experiencing the tapering, meaning the Federal Reserve taking printing down. They already printed $4 trillion, which is a lot of money. So let's hope for the best.
Let's hope, yes.
3 years ago, when we started talking to Patrick, I remember he was talking about why he had invested in Bangladesh. And one of the things he said he liked was that it had a low correlation to the world economy. And it was something that he thought maybe the Philippines might share. And over the past few years, I guess the Philippines has continued to grow despite everything. The original question was, what do we see as external factors that might impact the Philippines? And if you look at obviously you have to look at the trading partners, but I think more importantly, given that even Mr. Villegas, Dr. Villegas has said that to a great extent the growth of the Philippines is tied to the amount of remittances coming in. So you need to look at the host nations of the OFWs. And to a certain extent, there's a little comfort that even if they don't do too well, we'll continue to see the remittances coming back in. You saw it through the Arab Spring, through the subprime crisis. So maybe it's not that much of a risk, but that's one external thing we're always looking at, and seeing how it might impact the consumption spending in the Philippines.
Very good. Okay, we've talked about the external and how it might impact the internal situation here. Well, how about the internal situation? What can you say about that? What are the risks that might slow? I mean, it is an exciting time for Philippines, certainly. What do you think might be the circumstances that might dampen that?
I mean, again, I'm not an expert in the Philippine economy, but I very much like what I see here. And I think the risks, to my, not being an economist again, but they are maybe balanced to the downside and the upside. And I'm also very optimistic about predictable growth. So if they're balanced, that means that it could overheat at one stage, because if a lot of people believe that this is a 9% growth country for the next 10 years, you could at the end of the day see a lot of hot money here, right?
Yes.
And that could create some bubble phenomenons. On the other hand, if growth is 6.5 or 7, is that a disaster? To me, it's not. So as an investor, I think that it will be hopefully possible to manage this balanced growth scenario for the Philippines.
Okay, very good.
I think if you look from a macro perspective, the Philippines seems to be in a sweet spot. I think what I'd like to see personally is, if you look around, this doesn't appear to be a capital-starved economy. And when we were hosting investors as we were raising the fund, that was one of the comments that stood out. The guy came, he was sitting at the fort, and he said, "This doesn't look like a capital-starved economy." And I think to a certain extent that's true. But if you look at the sources of capital, I think it's very concentrated in the hands of a few. So I think we need to broaden the base of capital providers. And I think what that will lead to is a more competitive Philippines, a more competitive corporate sector, and also less dependence on the large corporates. Mr. Villegas talked about the free trade pact. I think the Philippines needs to have stronger companies to be able to compete when that does come around. And I think having a wider base of capital providers will promote that.
Okay. On the opportunity side, Nori and Javi, they have a great depth of knowledge of, I think, every industry in the nation. Are there certain industries that hopefully that you can discuss that you think are most exciting for the next 5 years or 10?
Yeah, I think we look at it as, we like themes rather than sectors.
Okay.
So we like the consumption theme. 70% of GDP is really consumption. But we also like the services theme, because I think the Philippines has a strong labor pool, which, having a strong labor pool means you can have a vibrant services sector. There was a slide that flashed previously that showed the sunshine. Unfortunately, Dr. Villegas didn't go through it, but I think I spotted many of the sectors that we'd like to look at. Tourism, education, retail, basically anything that benefits from the flows of the OFW money plus the BPO sector money.
Okay, very interesting. And on Well, the current growth sector, actually I spoke about this, I think it was with Javi some time ago, that the growth phase had been going for, I don't know, 12, 14 years in Philippines. How many more years do you think, this is a broad thing, but how many more years do you think we have to go before it might, you know, start to slow as it has in Indonesia and India and China and so forth?
Well, I'm an old man, so I don't worry about that. I think there are many years of growth.
Okay. Nori, can you pick is it 10 years or is it 3 years?
Yeah, we raised a fund and it's a 10-year fund, so at least 10 years.
Okay, so you've raised a 10-year fund. I didn't know it was a 10-year fund. Okay. Well, now, Nori, you talked a little bit about the private equity opportunity in Philippines and that there's much capital with a few big providers, but can you talk a bit about that? What do you think is the overall private equity opportunity in Philippines? Hopefully both of you, actually.
You want to go ahead?
No, I mean, the earlier speaker talked about the need for increased foreign direct investment. And I actually think that if we on top of that, more people will do the thing that we do, meaning investing growth capital in the form of equity into growing private companies. Obviously looking for an exit in sort of with a minimum or maximum of 10 years. But that I think could be quite a vibrant contribution to growth of the economy. And from what I hear also when I came in this room, there are more private equity players on the way here. And I mean, we happen actually, which we might be proud of one day, be the first sort of structure that we're on the ground and have our operation here in Manila. I mean, you have some of the big guys flying in and out. And I mean, we only raised $120 million. And so obviously maybe when the big guys come from Hong Kong or Singapore, 5 years down the road, we can exit our investment to them. But I think that that is, I mean, can give an important contribution to growth with sort of equity capital into private companies. That's what I think.
Nori?
I've been looking at the private equity opportunities in the Philippines since 1999, and I think it's only, you know, in the past couple of years where the opportunity for private equity is at its greatest. You know, I think, number one, there are a large number of businesses that can absorb the kind of capital that we're trying to put to work. And, you know, even as recent as 1999, we were very hard put to find companies that would accept or that could absorb a $15 million investment. Today, the number of companies, you know, after a dozen years of positive growth, the number of companies has multiplied. Then I also think the macroeconomic backdrop makes available value creation opportunities. You know, the companies can grow because the economy is growing. So organic growth is present. I think you have chances for margin improvement. There's the availability of leverage, so you can also create value through a little financial leverage. But more importantly, I think also now the companies, aside from being able to absorb the capital, many of them are also receptive nowadays to outside capital. So I think, you know, it's sort of a perfect storm brewing. You talked about other private equity guys that fly in and out. Maybe for them it's a little too early because they want to put larger amounts of capital to work. And, you know, maybe their time will come 5 years from now, hopefully when we are exiting our investments.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very interesting. So, but you're right that there is a larger number than we've seen in the past of new entrants. What do you think about that? What would be the number or the sizes that the Philippine economy could absorb without bubbles being created and things. Do you have any comment about it?
I mean, if we look around the world today, I mean, to find the countries with the characteristics of stability, balance of payment surpluses, in this case backed by remittances, and quite predictable growth. There are not so many of them, and there are some areas of the world that have run into difficulties. So I would guess that the focus on a country like the Philippines from international investors making sort of long-term commitments, because moving in and out of the stock market is another story. I think that will increase over time, by definition.
Okay. Yeah, Nori, no?
Yeah.
You've said a lot about it already.
What was the question again?
How many competitors do you think the country can absorb without, you guys driving you crazy?
I mean, we love competition. Competition is good. And I mean, that puts also my partners here under some pressure too, because it's all about execution at the end of the day. Money is in place, now it's about execution.
No, I think, if you just look at the recent past, even the big private equity guys trying to look for opportunities here, who are trying to put larger amounts of capital to work, have found outlets to do so. So CVC, for example, which is, I think their latest fund is probably a $4 billion fund just for Asia. They've managed to put money to work in RCBC, and they also acquired SPI from PLDT, or majority of SPI from PLDT. Then there's the capital group that has put some money into ABS-CBN. TPG has also put some money into a financial institution here. So even those big guys are finding opportunities here. They're fewer than the opportunity set we're looking at by virtue of the size. But even their amounts of capital can be absorbed by the system.
Okay, very good. And maybe I'll just, I know I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but Nori, I've promoted him as one of the nation's premier financial professionals, and certainly he is. And I noticed on his background, I didn't want to read all of this, Nora, but involved in quite a large number of projects over the years, previously with Rothschild, before that with a number of different organizations. Can you talk a little bit about that, Nori?
Sure.
Your experience in different projects and so forth?
I guess previous to starting Navigar with Patrick and Javi, I ran Rothschild's business, investment banking business in the Philippines. And, we were involved in privatization of the electricity sector. We were involved in disposals by international corporates of stakes they had here, as well as acquisitions by foreign companies of stakes here. So we advised British Gas, we advised PSOM of the Philippine government, we advised Coca-Cola FEMSA. We advised FEMSA on their acquisition of Coca-Cola bottlers here. And I think, that only bolsters the proposition that there are opportunities in the Philippines, because foreign investors are coming in and have said there's very little growth in their home markets. They're looking for other avenues of growth, and the Philippines provides that. Especially from a consumption point of view, FEMSA paid $1 billion for Coca-Cola bottlers here, and it was also one of our investors, very smart, very experienced in the consumer space. His business is in packaging. And what he told us really struck me. He said, he's been looking at developing countries since the 1970s. And he found that any time GDP per capita crosses the 2,900, 3,000 level, you see a change in consumption patterns. And increased velocity of consumption. So, we're almost there. Right? So this is a good time. And
it is, very good.
Waiting for that.
And Nori, could you also, just for some people who don't know, but talk a bit about your partner here? I could talk on and on about him, but I know he's kind of a shy type. But if you could describe a little bit, because a lot of people have a lot of respect for the work he's done.
Professional description or personal description?
Either, both.
No, Javi's obviously, you know, a great guy. I wouldn't have partnered with him if. Is he here anyway?
You can't miss him. He's the tallest guy at the back there. There he is with a big smile on his face.
So I better watch what I say then, because he's present. So. No, he's, you know, very, very accomplished entrepreneur. You know, one of the smartest guys I know, and you know, definitely very accomplished.
Okay, and maybe if I could ask Patrick a personal question about his opinion, but you notice Nori is a very strictly a finance person, whereas Javi is very strictly a more of a, you know, an entrepreneurial person. But I would say, ask a question, do you really think they're going to get along past their honeymoon phase? What do you think is the long term for them?
I think it's a very, very good match because you know, they represent, one is sort of serial entrepreneur and the other is more a finance guy, and I think the combination can be very, very constructive.
Yes, it is, and I've seen Javi get along with very difficult people, and Nori is certainly not a difficult person, so yes, I was more asking that in jest. And maybe, Patrick, if I could ask, you travel all around the world and have investments in Bangladesh and many other emerging countries. What do you think are some of the unique advantages, let's say, of Philippines in comparison to other emerging countries?
No, I think it's again what we have been discussing here earlier. It's the potential to increase the growth rate, but on top of that, I think the predictability. So I think my guess is that growth will be less volatile here than in many other parts of the world that are more dependent on sort of energy, raw materials, more debt. And as an investor, you know, I also prefer low volatility. So I very much like the characteristics, and extremely happy to be here. I mean, this fund, I and my partners, we are the largest investors in the fund. So I obviously have my own money at work here as well. That's the way we always do things. So we put our own money to work before we invite outside investors.
Okay, very good. Oh, one more light question, but as a coincidence, Sweden and Philippines, I don't know if you've heard of the Global Gender Gap Index by the World Economic Forum. And the top 5 of that are mainly Nordic countries. Number 4 is Sweden, and number 5 is our Philippines. Because women here, as in Sweden, have a very high penetration in business and government and politics and so forth, the professions, of course. And I noticed at your office here, quite a number of female senior professionals. I'd ask Patrick on a personal note, what's your experience with women in Philippines as professionals as compared to Sweden?
Again, I mean, we are almost 50-50, I believe, in the office, and I mean, I meet a lot of very ambitious, young, well-educated people in this country, and obviously some of the women working for us have been in doing the same thing, private equity in the U.S., San Francisco, and so forth. I'm extremely happy that they are willing to move back and contribute to our team here in Manila.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, it wasn't a conscious effort to do a 50-50 split, but you know, the quality of the women in the office, just during the interview process, just shone through, and you know, it just happened that way.
I see, and they smell a lot better too. So, and I know a number of them are back at the office. Glad to have them with us. Any comments? Any last comments you'd like to make, gentlemen?
No, again, I mean, if we succeed and others follow, and the sort of business of supporting private growing companies with capital, if that works, and we create decent risk-adjusted returns for our investors, then we could build a business here with fund number 2, fund number 3, fund number 4. So this is really for the long term. Actually, we do this only in one other country, which is Bangladesh, and that is also predictable, but it's a totally different environment. And that also boiled down to that I met some people who were willing to run that business. But there we are now raising fund number 2. So hopefully, 20 years time here, we will have fund number 4, fund number 5. And having been on the ground for a long time, I'm very much looking forward to that.
Very good.
Yeah, we obviously have a very high level of conviction that the Philippines will continue to grow. Even our team, we've recruited from abroad, Filipinos coming back. It's an all-Filipino team. That's indicative of the level of commitment we have to the Philippines. And we would like to put some capital to work, and are always on the lookout for businesses that, growing businesses that require additional capital to help them achieve whatever they want to achieve.
Oh, okay. Could we welcome Dr. Bernie Villegas to the stage, and we'll have some questions from the audience. That's a very good idea. Please, anybody ready to ask a question? Okay, I'll just run over.
Good morning, Mark Aga from South Capital Partners. Good morning, Dr. Bernie Villegas, my former professor at UAP. It's good to see you here after so many years. My question really relates to what I suppose has not been mentioned this morning, is the huge risk of encroachment into Philippine resources and territory of China. And I would like to provoke a response from the panel as to whether or not you feel that China's direction encroachment on the resource areas of the Philippines will be a factor in the future, or whether you will discount it as being something that will get resolved. And keeping in mind, of course, that all the activity in Ukraine right now, nobody thought that Russia would invade another country. China's looking at what's happening there, I'm sure. Do you discount it, or do you think that it's going to have an impact, and what do you think that impact would be?
I discount it. I think China is just saber rattling. China still has a problem of incorporating into their growth 800 million Chinese who have not benefited from trickle-down. Only about 400 to 500 million Chinese. Of course, it's a large number. I'm not belittling that. But poverty is still a big problem in China. They cannot waste resources in adventures outside of the country. There will be a social volcano in China if they don't focus now on how to incorporate those 800 million people. Now seeing what has happened to those who have benefited from growth, so there's a tremendous gap. And so I think China just does those things in the South China Sea just to remind ourselves and the rest of the world that they are a power to contend with. But I don't think they will do anything untoward. That's my opinion. And probably the other thing is, thanks to them, in a way, it's a blessing in disguise, the Americans are back in force in the Pacific. I'm sure you remember that after the U.S. closed their bases in Subic and Clark, they almost forgot us for a while. Now they're back in full force. And so we have a balance of power here. So I may be, again, overly optimistic, but I don't think the Chinese will really do anything untoward in those territories.
Good morning, Bernie. I'm Bill Ritana from
Good morning, yes.
Esquire Financing, Inc. Bernie, what can you say about the perennial pain in the neck or pain in the ass of the entry of foreign investors into this country, especially in the infrastructure, because of the TRO system, which is a typical example would be the former NAIA 3 project.
Well, I think that's one of the institutions that we are still in the process of perfecting, the Justice Department. But I think the Supreme Court has made some very good decisions in the past. Remember, the Supreme Court who actually said that the Mining Act was constitutional some years back when it was suspended. So I think it's not all wrong decisions by the Supreme Court. There are some TROs I think the main problem is more local government. Mayors who do not more or less follow the national policy. But now that you referred to mining, I think this one area where the president has to be more clear about his view. I think he has a number of advisors who are giving him the wrong advice about mining. So, and that's where, fortunately, there are groups, I refer to them, Management Association of the Philippines, Finannce, Makati Business Club, that are making their voices clear about the advantages of mining, and that mining in many parts of the world has been responsible, and that we cannot condemn mining as a whole. And so I think we just have to try educating the policymakers, and that's part of what I said, the institutionalization of policies.
Okay. Any more questions? No, we're a quiet group. Yeah? Okay, maybe one more question about, since we're getting political here, but there's a new election coming up in the next few years. It's on everybody's mind. Some people are concerned about this. What do you think, Bernie? Is this going to, if we had a fella, you know, who pulls things back to some of the bad things of the past, would that impact the future?
No, I always said that whoever becomes the next president, there are a lot of these growth drivers that will completely ignore who is in Malacanang. Overseas workers will continue to send their relatives $25 billion or more. The BPOs, in fact, the greatest thing about the BPO, it's been a sector that has had absolutely no real government participation. And I think domestic tourists will continue to discover Siquijor, Bohol, etc., whoever is in Malacanang. But now that you've asked me a very provocative question, let me give you a very provocative answer. No? And this is public, so I can repeat it because it's a public information. I referred to that Mactan International Conference of Call Centers. Some of you were probably there. And the one who was moderating the conference was Rico Hizon, the famous Filipino announcer in BBC.
Yes.
And he turned to me during the open forum and he asked me, Dr. Villegas, who will be the president of the Philippines in 2016? No? So I said, Rico, you're putting me on the spot. No. But I told him, some of you probably remember my answer, but I'm willing to meet your challenge. Like all Filipinos here, I read polls. So I'm sure you know that we have a lot of polls here. No? And the polls tell me that if an election were to be held today, the vice president would be elected president. That's what the polls say. Then there was a group of Cebuanos said, boo! I said, I didn't say I was going to vote for him. I said, he is the one that the polls say is most electable. But in order to appease those Cebuanos, I think the Cebuanos don't like him for some reason or another. I said, don't you worry. 2.5 years are still long enough for a dark horse to appear. But me in my big mouth, I had to add, I don't think you can find a darker Filipino. Then Rico Hizon told me, Dr. Villegas, you are on YouTube. I said, I don't care. I heard the vice president himself boasting once, publicly, that he may be the first black president of the Philippines. And then when I said that, I realized, oh, there are so many foreigners here. They're very particular about a racist remark. So I said, well, anyway, today, black is beautiful. Take a look at Abuama, who will be visiting us in April. No? Then, true enough, there was a Nigerian in the audience. He stood up and told me, Dr. Villegas, and he showed himself to the audience. Black is beautiful. I agree with you. That's my answer. Digest the information.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Please, a hand for our panelists. Thank you very much to all of you. Dr. Bernie Villegas, Patrick Brummer, and Nori Poblador.